All right, ready to dive in. Today, it's the legacy of, well, a pretty incredible guy. We're talking Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer, the president, the Nobel Peace Prize winner. A full century of American history right there.
You know, when you look at a life that long, it's easy to just say the big headlines, right? The presidency, the Nobel.
Right.
But going through these CNN articles, what's really striking are the connections, the threads that run through it all.
Okay, so we're talking about the reactions, the analysis after his passing. Everyone's got a Carter story, it seems like.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just praise. Even people who were on the opposite side politically, like, Donald Trump, even he's acknowledging Carter's pure dedication. He even talked about the challenges Carter faced in a way that, I don't know, almost sounded empathetic.
From Trump, yeah, that's definitely saying something. But it does seem like, even with the 70s economy, the energy crisis and all that, Carter never backed down from that focus on human rights. Almost cost him politically, though, you could argue.
It's fascinating how consistent that was for him. The CNN piece highlights how Carter took a really tough stance on human rights in South Korea, strained things with a key ally during the Cold War, actually.
Right.
And then there's his dealings with Argentina, a country dealing with their own dirty war at the time.
It was a tightrope walk, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Trying to be a champion for human rights globally, but also dealing with the realities of the Cold War.
Exactly. And this is where it gets even more interesting. The blog goes into how Carter's commitment to human rights really shaped his approach to those SALT II negotiations with the Soviets.
Oh, SALT II. Now remind me, what was the gist of that again?
Basically, SALT II was about putting limits on the number of nuclear weapons, both for the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Right.
The goal was, well, to prevent the Cold War from going, full-blown nuclear apocalypse. And Carter's argument was that by emphasizing human rights, you could create a more stable world. A world where everyone, even the Soviets, would ultimately be safer.
So he saw human rights as, crucial to global security. Pretty forward-thinking, especially in the middle of the Cold War.
Absolutely. And it goes back to that thread I mentioned earlier, the thread that connects his presidency to his, Nobel Prize-winning work later on. The idea that peace isn't just the absence of conflict, but it's about creating the conditions where human dignity can actually thrive.
That makes his approach to places like, say, Iran and South Africa even more interesting, right? Those were regimes with some seriously bad human rights records. And yet, Carter still tried to engage with them, to nudge them toward reform.
Right, and that's the paradox of Jimmy Carter. This guy was an unwavering idealist, but also a pragmatist. He was willing to work within the messy reality of global politics. He understood sometimes you have to talk to people you disagree with, even if it means you're going to get criticized.
And speaking of criticism, we can't talk about Carter without talking about, well, the elephant in the room, the Iran hostage crisis. It wasn't just a diplomatic thing, it was a whole national trauma, playing out on TV every night.
Yeah. One of the analysts in the CNN piece made a point that really stuck with me. They said the hostage crisis wasn't just about those 52 Americans. It was a symbol of America's declining influence in the world. And it all happened just as the rise of revolutionary Islam was, shaking things up globally.
And it happened on Carter's watch. It might not have been entirely his fault, but it became the defining moment of his presidency.
And it overshadowed a lot of his achievements, for sure. Take the Camp David Accords, for example. Bringing together Menachem Begin of Israel and Anwar Sadat of Egypt. Monumental diplomacy right there.
It's that picture, right? The three of them, arms linked at Camp David. A moment that captured everyone's imagination. This glimmer of hope in a region where conflict seemed, well, endless.
Yeah, exactly. But you're right, the hostage crisis cast a long shadow over his presidency. It shows you how one event can really shape public perception, even when there's a much bigger story to be told.
Okay, so we've got this complex figure, right? Battling economic troubles, a Cold War, and a hostage crisis that gripped the nation. So where do we go from here?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Because Carter's story doesn't end with his presidency. In fact, you could argue that's where it truly begins. I mean, think about it. Most presidents, once they leave office, they write their memoirs, do the speaking circuit, maybe set up a foundation, right? But Carter, he wins a Nobel Peace Prize.
And not for anything he did as president, but for what he did after.
Exactly. This is where that whole through line of his life becomes super clear. The CNN blog actually quotes the Nobel Committee. They praised his, get this, untiring effort to find peaceful solutions to international conflicts, to advance democracy and human rights, and to promote economic and social development.
It's like leaving the White House actually freed him up to be that global peacemaker he always wanted to be.
Exactly. He's mediating in these hotspots, places nobody else could touch, monitoring elections in brand new democracies, building houses with Habitat for Humanity. It's like the Carter Show, but now it's global and he's in charge.
And that Nobel Prize money, almost $1 million, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
He poured it all into the Carter Center. It wasn't about the fame, it was about making a bigger impact.
You got it. And the Carter Center, this isn't just some think tank writing reports. They're on the ground dealing with stuff like guinea worm disease, which they've practically eradicated worldwide.
Talk about a legacy. And it's easy to forget, Carter was a scientist at heart, a naval engineer, and he brought that whole problem-solving mindset to global issues.
Yeah, he combined that political experience with this deep belief in, well, human potential. The CNN piece mentions how he used to say, peace is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice.
Powerful stuff. And we can't talk about Carter without talking about Rosalind.
Right. Of course not.
77 years of marriage. They were partners in every sense of the word.
The CNN blog highlights how Rosalind wasn't just like a typical first lady. She was a force all on her own, working on mental health, advocating for families dealing with caregiving.
And a team on the world stage too, right? Traveling the world, meeting leaders, working on those habitat builds together. They really made it look easy. That shared dedication to service.
Oh, there's this great anecdote in the blog about how they would argue about politics at the dinner table, just like any other couple. But no matter what, at the end of the day, it was those shared values and their deep love for each other that shone through.
It reminds you that even these huge figures, they're human too. They've got partners, families, all the ups and downs that come with that.
And their story shows you don't need to be in some high office to make a difference. Their work, whether during the presidency or after, it was driven by this huge sense of compassion, this belief that everyone can make the world better.
So here we have this amazing life, peanut farmer to president to global peacemaker. What's the takeaway for us? The everyday people trying to, make sense of it all?
What hits me is how bold it all was. This guy facing a hostage crisis, a struggling economy, a Cold War. And he never lost sight of his values, never stopped believing in human dignity. That's what kept him going, kept him fighting for a better world, even after he left the White House.
Never stopped trying to make a difference. And that's powerful for all of us, right? Whether we're leading a nation or just trying to be better neighbors, friends, citizens.
It makes you wonder, what would the world look like if we all had that kind of purpose?
It's inspiring, isn't it? And the CNN blog even mentioned how important Carter's faith was to all of this. He genuinely believed in serving others, not just talking about it, but actually doing it. And it wasn't about some big, showy things either. He taught Sunday school his whole life. Even as a former president, he was connecting with people on a personal level.
Oh, there's a story in the blog about how even in his late 90s, he was out there building houses with Habitat for Humanity, working right alongside volunteers half his age. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty, to really be present in the work.
Like he was saying, hey, I'm just a regular guy trying to do some good. No ego, just a deep commitment to making the world a better place.
Makes you think, what's our excuse?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter, I gotta ask, what do you think his most lasting impact will be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. But I think it's the example he set. He showed us that leadership isn't about power or your position. It's about using what you have, your voice, your actions, to make things a little bit better.
Yeah, he set a high bar for all of us. Like he was saying, we can all do more, be more.
And that's a powerful message to carry with us. So going forward, ask yourself, what would Jimmy do?
I love that. What would Jimmy do? Great question to keep in mind. And for our listeners, if you want to learn more about Jimmy Carter, check out the Carter Center website. Read his books, watch some interviews. There's so much out there just waiting to be explored.
A legacy worth diving into, for sure.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter. It's been an honor to, explore his story with you.
It really does make you think, what would the world look like if, more people approached life with that kind of purpose?
It's inspiring, for sure. And the CNN blog even mentioned how much Carter's faith played into all this. He truly believed in serving others. And not just in words, but in actual deeds.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't about making these grand gestures either. He taught Sunday school his whole life. Did you know that? even as a former president, connecting with people, just one-on-one.
Yeah, there's a story in the blog. Even in his late 90s, he was still building those houses with Habitat for Humanity, right alongside volunteers half his age. Wasn't afraid to roll up his sleeves and get involved.
It's like he was saying, look, I'm just a guy trying to do some good. No airs, just pure commitment to, well, making a difference.
Makes you think, right? What's our excuse?
Hey, seriously. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Jimmy Carter's life and legacy, I gotta ask, what do you think his most lasting impact will be?
Tough question. But I'd say the example he set. You know, he showed us that leadership isn't about power or titles. It's about using your voice, your actions, to leave things a little better than you found them.
He raised the bar, for sure. Like he was challenging us, saying we can all step it up.
And that's a powerful message to carry with us. So next time you're faced with a decision, big or small, ask yourself, what would Jimmy do?
I love that. What would Jimmy do? A great thing to remember. And for all our listeners, if you want to dive deeper into Jimmy Carter's life, check out the Carter Center website. Read his books, watch some interviews. There's a treasure trove of information out there.
A legacy worth exploring, that's for sure.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter. It's been a privilege to, well, share his story with you.